My name is Vanessa Brooks, and I'm 32. When my father passed away last fall, the foundation of everything I believed about family crumbled in an instant. It took just one text from my stepmother, Linda. The family has agreed. You shouldn't attend your dad's will reading. No explanation, no invitation, just silence where love should have been. I remember standing in my office, phone trembling in my hand, realizing I'd been erased from the most important moment in my father's legacy. Not because of anything I'd done, but because I no longer fit the story Linda wanted to tell. What none of them knew was that my father had quietly left me something they could never take away, a secret set of deeds and a message that would change everything. If you've ever felt like you were written out of your own family, replaced by people who never truly understood you, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. When I was a little girl, our family home in Encinitas felt like a sanctuary. My mother, Julia, was the kind of woman who could bake bread from scratch in the morning and negotiate a real estate deal by afternoon, her laughter echoing through the sunny kitchen as she coached me on everything from math homework to the value of keeping your word. My father, Edward Brooks, ran his real estate development firm from a tiny corner office above Main Street, but at home he was always just Dad, never too busy for a backyard game or an impromptu ice cream trip after dinner. We were a team, the three of us. Fiercely loyal, fiercely loving, never doubting that our little world was unbreakable. That illusion ended the summer I turned 12, when cancer stole my mother so quickly I didn't have time to say goodbye. My memories from that year are a blur of hospital visits and awkward casseroles left by neighbors. I remember the silence in the house after the funeral, the rooms that seemed bigger and colder than before, my father's heavy footsteps echoing late into the night. We did our best to hold on to each other, but something essential had gone missing. Something even the sharpest business sense or the best laid plans couldn't restore. A year later, Linda appeared. She was polished, confident, with a crisp handshake and a laugh that never quite reached her eyes. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, Ava, a year younger than me, and Max, a loud, restless boy of 10, who seemed to arrive with her like extra luggage. At first, Linda tried to win me over with compliments and gifts. New dresses, a shiny laptop for school, even a gold necklace for my 13th birthday. I wanted to like her, but the way she talked to Dad, so certain, so dismissive of the things we'd shared with my mom, made me uneasy. She'd make small changes at first, moving the family photos into a different hallway, rearranging furniture, redecorating the kitchen in her favorite minimalist whites and grays. Each tweak was small, almost invisible, but they added up to a home I barely recognized. Dad, to his credit, tried to keep peace. He told me Linda just wanted us to feel like a family, that change was part of moving on. But the more Linda settled in, the more she took charge, especially when it came to money. Suddenly, she was the one paying bills, organizing holidays, deciding where we'd vacation and with whom. She put Ava and Max in private schools and signed them up for tennis and music lessons, to give them the same chances Vanessa had, as she put it, ignoring the fact that my happiest memories were afternoons spent at public parks or helping Dad check on new builds after school. Tension simmered beneath the surface, especially as I grew older and more independent. I had my mother's knack for numbers and negotiation, and I spent high school summers shadowing Dad at his company, learning to read blueprints, watching meetings unfold, sitting silently in the back until he asked my opinion. Dad encouraged my curiosity, but Linda was less supportive. "You should be out with friends, not spending your time on construction sites," she'd say, her smile tight. "That's not a life for a young woman." Still, I persisted. After graduation, I earned a business degree, always planning to join Dad full-time. But by the time I returned, Linda had moved from running the household to managing the company's finances. She convinced Dad to bring Ava and Max into the business too, even though neither of them had any real interest. Max started as an engineer, mostly skipping meetings to hang out at the gym, while Ava joined the marketing team and spent more time on Instagram than on site visits. I tried to believe Dad was still in control, but I could see how Linda's influence grew, how she steered board meetings, how she'd correct him in front of staff, how she'd talk over me in family discussions. Our biggest conflict started with a single piece of land, the last property my mother had ever purchased, a strip of coastal bluff overlooking the Pacific. I wanted to honor her by building a row of affordable homes there, working with local nonprofits to help families get their start. Linda was appalled. "We're not a charity, Vanessa," she told me at dinner, setting down her wine glass with a decisive thud. "Your mother may have meant well, but this is business. That land is worth millions if we develop luxury condos. We have to think bigger. Think legacy." Her words stung, and Dad's silence hurt even more. When I pressed him afterward, he just sighed. "Linda's right, honey. It's a new era. The business has to evolve." It wasn't just the land, it was everything. Birthdays where my name was left off the cake. Family vacations where I was expected to entertain Ava and Max. Conversations about the company where my ideas were met with polite dismissal or outright laughter. When I tried to push for affordable housing or sustainable design, Linda would smile indulgently and tell me I was naive. Even Dad, who once championed my vision, became distant, frustrated by the constant tension, more eager to avoid conflict than to stand by me. The breaking point came the Christmas I was 25. Linda announced at the dinner table that, moving forward, all family business decisions would be made by a new advisory board consisting of herself, Ava, Max, and Dad. I was not included. "You're too close to the projects, Vanessa," Linda explained. "We need a broader perspective." My father looked down at his plate and said nothing. That night, I sat on the back porch, staring at the lights strung around the patio, listening to the distant sound of the ocean. I realized for the first time that my place in the family was conditional, subject to Linda's approval, threatened by every independent thought I had. I was losing my father, my family, and my sense of home, one quiet concession at a time. The old house that had once sheltered me now felt more like a museum, each room curated, each memory carefully boxed away. I clung to my mother's lessons, the few pieces of her jewelry I'd managed to keep, and the hope that one day I'd be able to honor her legacy on my own terms. Even then, I promised myself I would never let anyone erase who I was, or the values my parents had built their lives on, no matter how isolated I felt in the only home I'd ever known. When I finally left home at 26, it wasn't a dramatic exit. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just a hollow sort of ache as I loaded the last of my boxes into my old Honda Civic and watched the only life I'd ever known shrink in the rearview mirror. I found a tiny apartment in downtown San Diego, a third-floor walk-up with peeling paint, a leaky faucet, and a view of the alley. Those first months were lonely. I'd walk the streets at night, sometimes ending up at the waterfront, watching the city lights dance on the bay, and wondering if I'd made a mistake. Sometimes I'd imagine my mother walking beside me, steady and wise, reminding me that starting over was an act of courage. I threw myself into work, starting at the very bottom as a leasing agent for a tiny real estate firm where no one cared about my last name or my family's reputation. My boss, Mrs. Hernandez, was a whirlwind of energy, sharp-eyed and practical, and she didn't tolerate excuses. "You want to get ahead, Vanessa?" she'd say, shoving another stack of listings at me. "You have to do the work. Nobody hands you anything." So I hustled. I spent my weekends putting up flyers, showing apartments to students and single parents, learning how to read people by the way they lingered in doorways or ran their fingers along kitchen counters. Every lease signed was a tiny victory. I saved every dollar, skipped happy hours, and fixed my own leaky faucet instead of calling the landlord. I made mistakes, plenty of them. There were months when the only thing in my fridge was yogurt and old apples, when my car broke down and I had to walk to open houses in the rain. But each setback was proof that I could survive without anyone swooping in to rescue me. Over time, small successes started to pile up. I was promoted twice, and soon Mrs. Hernandez began inviting me to sit in on meetings with property owners, developers, and city officials. I learned how to negotiate contracts, how to spot a bad deal before that was the work that made me proudest, helping single moms land a decent apartment, or finding affordable spaces for immigrant families starting over in a strange city. Sometimes, as I watched the keys change hands, I'd remember my mother's dream of building homes that weren't just for the wealthy. I felt like I was carrying her torch, in my own small way. Despite the grind, I didn't lose touch with my roots completely. My father called sometimes, usually late at night after Linda had gone to bed. Our conversations were awkward at first. He'd ask about my work, offer gentle advice, sometimes apologize for being distant. There was so much unsaid between us, but I clung to those calls, grateful for any reminder that he still thought of me as his daughter. We never talked about Linda, or the fights, or the business. But I always ended those calls with a little more hope. One person I relied on more than anyone was my Uncle Sam, my mother's younger brother, a retired teacher with a wild gray beard and a sense of humor that could light up a whole room. Sam and I had always been close. He'd show up at my apartment with bags of groceries, old family photos, and his latest get-rich-slow investment scheme. He never once took Linda's side, never doubted my choices. He became my lifeline, a living bridge to the past I missed and the future I was building. It took 3 years of hard work before I finally had enough to launch my own business. I called it Solace Properties, a name that felt like a quiet promise to my mother and to myself. I started small, flipping rundown duplexes in the city's overlooked neighborhoods, reinvesting every profit, building a reputation for being fair, honest, and relentless. Sometimes, I'd sit alone in my office at midnight, staring at spreadsheets, feeling the exhaustion in my bones but also a satisfaction I'd never felt in my father's company. I was doing it on my own. Every win was mine, and every loss too. San Diego was kind to me. The city was always moving, always growing, and there was a hunger for affordable housing that no one else seemed willing to meet. I made connections with local contractors and community leaders, and my name started popping up in city council meetings, in neighborhood newsletters, and eventually, on the front page of local business magazines. "Young developer reinvents affordable housing," one headline read, and I clipped it out and mailed it to my father. He never mentioned it, but one night, during a rare call, he said, "I'm proud of you, kid. Your mom would be too." I sat on my porch that night, staring at the sky, and cried for the first time in years. Still, there were days when the old wounds ached. I kept tabs on my father's company from afar, reading press releases, checking property records, and listening to rumors from mutual friends. I heard that Linda was still steering the ship, that Ava had been promoted to vice president of marketing, and that Max was burning through budgets as fast as the accountants could rein him in. The company was thriving, at least on paper, but I could see the cracks forming. Projects over budget, community backlash, staff turnover, signs that Linda's iron grip was squeezing the life out of what my parents had built. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if I went back, if I tried to claim my place at the table again. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the look on my father's face the night he let Linda cut me out. The ache in my chest would return, and I'd bury myself in work, reminding myself that I had built something real, something lasting, on my own terms. By the time I was 30, Solace Properties had grown from a scrappy upstart to a respected name in the industry. I won a regional award for innovation in housing, and a national nonprofit reached out to partner on a project for homeless veterans. My story was featured on a podcast about female entrepreneurs, and the mayor herself cut the ribbon at the opening of my first mixed-in apartment complex. At every milestone, Sam was there, beaming with pride, snapping photos, toasting my victories with cheap champagne. Even as I celebrated these successes, a part of me still longed for my family's approval. I wanted my father to see what I'd accomplished, to know that, even without his help, I'd carried forward his vision. I wanted to believe that blood could be thicker than resentment, that love could outlast betrayal. But as the years passed and my business flourished, I realized that the home I'd lost wasn't coming back. All I could do was build a new one, brick by brick, deal by deal, memory by memory. October brought an unexpected chill to San Diego, the kind that seeps through the city's endless sun and reminds you that seasons still change, no matter how far you run. I was reviewing plans for a new community center when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, distracted by a contractor's question, but something made me answer. On the other end was Uncle Sam, his voice raw and trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "Vanessa, it's your dad. He passed away last night." Things stopped. I felt the world tilt beneath me, like every carefully balanced foundation I'd built was suddenly crumbling. I mumbled something, maybe a thank you, maybe a plea for him to say it wasn't true, but Sam just kept talking, filling the silence with gentle assurances I couldn't hear. My heart was pounding, ears ringing with memories I thought I'd buried. Childhood road trips, my father's smile at my graduation, the quiet phone calls we'd shared in recent years. I barely remembered the drive north. I packed a bag on autopilot, threw it in my car, and spent hours on the freeway with the radio low and my thoughts loud. By the time I reached Encinitas, the sun was sinking behind the bluffs and the air was heavy with the scent of salt and eucalyptus. Pulling into the driveway of my childhood home, I hesitated before getting out, bracing myself for what I might find inside. The house looked different, even from the street. The rose bushes my mother had planted were gone, replaced by drought-resistant shrubs and polished gravel. There was a sleek silver SUV parked in Dad's old spot, and every window glowed with soft, coordinated lighting. As I walked up the path, my keys felt foreign in my hand. The front door opened before I could knock. Linda stood there, perfectly composed in a crisp navy dress, her blonde hair twisted into a smooth navy dress. "Nisa," she said, not quite smiling. "You came?" She didn't move to hug me. Her tone was polite, practiced, like a neighbor greeting a distant acquaintance. I stepped inside and was struck by how cold the house felt. The family photos had been replaced with modern art. The old piano was gone. The familiar creak in the floorboards had disappeared under plush carpeting. It was as if every trace of my childhood and of my mother had been erased. Ava and Max were sitting at the kitchen island, murmuring quietly over matching mugs of tea. Ava gave me a stiff nod. Max barely looked up from his phone. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was hollow. Dad's favorite chair sat empty in the corner, draped with a designer throw that didn't suit him at all. There was a hush in the air, the kind that lingers after a storm, heavy with things unsaid. Linda gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. "Where is he?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "At a funeral home," she replied. "The service is in 2 days. Private. Just family and close friends." There was a pointed edge to her words. "Of course, you're welcome to attend." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wandered through the house in a daze, taking in the changes, feeling more like a stranger than a daughter. In the hallway, I paused before a framed photograph of my father, one of the only ones left on display. He looked older, thinner than I remembered, but there was still a warmth in his eyes that brought tears to mind. That night, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, now a guest room decorated in muted tones, with no trace of my old posters or books. Uncle Sam stopped by to sit with me, sharing memories and quiet stories of Dad's final weeks. He told me how Dad had asked for me often, how he kept a photo of us on his nightstand until the end. The pain of not being there when he needed me most carved a deep ache in my chest. The day of the funeral dawned gray and overcast, the kind of sky that feels like a curtain pulled over the world. People I barely recognized came to pay respects, old colleagues, distant cousins, business partners. Linda stood at the front, receiving condolences with the practiced grace of someone used to being in control. Ava and Max stayed close by her side, exchanging whispers that made me feel even more like an outsider. After the service, I tried to find comfort in old routines, helping clear dishes, checking on Uncle Sam, exchanging polite small talk with guests. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I'd missed a vital chapter of my family's story. The final blow came that evening, when I found Linda waiting for me in the living room. She didn't waste words. "There's a family meeting tomorrow morning at the attorney's office regarding your father's will." Her eyes were cool, unreadable. "It's just for immediate family. The children and I will handle things. You should rest and head back to San Diego once you've said your goodbyes." It took me a moment to register what she was saying. "You're telling me not to come to my own father's will reading?" I asked, incredulous. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Edward made his wishes clear. He wanted the company and the estate handled by those who were present, who supported him in the last years." She didn't look at me. "It's better for everyone if you don't make things difficult." Shock gave way to a deep, simmering anger. For years I'd felt myself slipping out of the family narrative, but this was the final erasure. Not just forgotten, deliberately excluded. I wanted to argue, to shout, but all my energy had been spent grieving. I turned away before she could see me cry. That night, I barely slept. I wandered the garden in the dark, searching for traces of my parents, feeling the weight of their absence pressing on every surface. I tried to remember the last words Dad had spoken to me, tried to imagine what he would want me to do now. I couldn't escape the certainty that something wasn't right, that there was more to his story and mine than Linda wanted me to know. With dawn came resolve. If my father's legacy was truly at stake, I owed it to him, and to myself, to find out the truth, no matter what Linda tried to hide. The morning air was heavy with dew, and my shoes grew damp as I paced the edges of our backyard, mind racing through every possibility. Sleep had been impossible. My mind kept returning to Linda's words, to my father's memory, and to the sense that my family was slipping away, deed by deed, memory by memory. The garden had always been my mother's sanctuary, later my own. After her death, Dad and I had tended it together, pulling weeds and planting new things every spring. Now, the roses were gone, the soil turned over for succulents, but I wandered out anyway, seeking comfort from what was left. I paused under the old magnolia tree, its branches gnarled but steadfast. As a child, I'd buried countless treasures at its roots. Friendship bracelets, time capsules, and once, a tiny music box my mother gave me for my 7th birthday. Now, for the first time in years, I remembered my father's odd promise, spoken one evening as twilight fell over the yard. If you ever feel lost, Vanessa, look for the answers where our family began. Some secrets are meant for you alone. I'd always thought he meant the lessons of our shared garden, but now, with everything else stripped away, I wondered if he'd meant something more. Driven by instinct, I knelt down, pressing my hands into the cool dirt, and within minutes my fingers struck metal. I unearthed a battered tin box, far too large to be one of my old childhood treasures. With trembling hands, I pried it open. Inside, I found a small velvet pouch containing a heavy, old-fashioned key, a flash drive, and an envelope with my name in Dad's careful script. Stared at the contents, heart pounding. I moved to the patio, hands shaking as I tore open the envelope and unfolded a sheet of paper. Dearest Vanessa, the letter began, his handwriting strong but unsteady. If you're reading this, I'm gone. There are things I couldn't say aloud, things I couldn't trust to anyone else. I hope you'll understand why I did what I did. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. He explained that after my mother's death, he'd tried his best to rebuild the family, to create something stable for all of us. But as the years passed, he saw how Linda's ambitions grew, how she sought to control the business, the finances, and even him. He'd watched as I was slowly edged out, not by accident, but by design. I regret that I didn't fight harder for you, he wrote. I hope someday you'll forgive me. He went on to detail the steps he'd taken to protect my mother's legacy, and mine. The key, he wrote, belonged to a safe deposit box at First American Bank, number 311. The flash drive contained documents, videos, and evidence of his intentions. What's in that box, he wrote, is rightfully yours. I wanted to make sure no one, not Linda, not the company's board, could take it away. My breath caught as the enormity of his words sank in. I'd come home expecting nothing but grief and maybe a final insult. Instead, my father had left me a last chance to reclaim not only my place in the family, but the future he and my mother had always dreamed of. Without another thought, I grabbed the key and the flash drive and rushed inside, barely stopping to clean the dirt from my hands. I powered up my laptop and plugged in the drive, video files, scanned contracts, letters. My father's digital voice filled the room, explaining everything he'd been unable to say in life. In the main video, filmed just months before his death, Dad looked thinner, but his eyes burned with resolve. Vanessa, you deserve to know the truth, he said. He spoke of Linda's manipulations, how she'd pressured him to change the company's structure, how she'd pushed for projects that valued profit over people, how she'd lobbied to sideline me from the business and the family alike. I let it happen for too long, but I've fixed what I can. He revealed that months earlier he had legally transferred the deeds to the company's most valuable properties, my mother's original land, the downtown office building, the development parcels we'd always dreamed of turning into community housing, directly to me. They were held in a trust in my name, outside the reach of Linda or her children, and the transfer was airtight, verified by his longtime attorney and friend, Mr. Riley. By the time you read this, these properties are already yours, he said. No one can change that, not even Linda. The only thing you have to do is claim them. He closed with a plea for understanding. I'm sorry for all the ways I failed you. I hope this helps to set things right. Don't let them erase what your mother and I built. And don't let them erase you. Spent the rest of the morning in a stunned daze, scrolling through the files and the paperwork, half afraid it was all a mistake. But every signature, every date, every video backed up what he said. I copied everything onto a secure drive and tucked the originals away in my bag. By the time the bank opened, I was waiting outside, the key clutched in my hand. Inside, the safe deposit box opened with a satisfying click. Within, I found a thick file of property deeds, signed, witnessed, and filed, plus a notarized statement from my father confirming the intent behind every transaction. There was also a letter from Mr. Riley, offering his support should I need legal representation. My father's planning was meticulous. He had not only ensured that I would receive my mother's land, but he had structured it so that even if Linda contested his will, the properties would remain mine. The realization brought a surge of emotions: gratitude for his foresight, sorrow for the pain that had made it necessary, and resolve to see this through to the end. When I returned to the house, Linda was already preparing to leave for the attorney's office, dressed impeccably and surrounded by Ava and Max, who looked smugly confident. She glanced at me, expression unreadable. "You're still here?" she asked, her tone neutral. "I thought you'd be gone by now." I met her gaze, steady for the first time in years. "I have some unfinished business," I said quietly. She shrugged, dismissive, and swept out the door with her children in tow. Alone in the silence, I clutched the folder of deeds and my father's letter, the weight of both in my arms and my heart. The time had come to face the family that had tried to erase me, and to show them that I wasn't going anywhere. Not anymore. The day of the will reading arrived, cloaked in the kind of stillness that usually comes before a storm. I dressed carefully, pulling on the same navy blazer I'd worn to pitch my first development deal, a silent token of all the battles I'd fought to stand on my own. In my bag, tucked beneath a battered leather folder, were the documents my father had entrusted to me: the deeds, the notarized letters, the trust, paperwork, and copies of every file from the safe deposit box. As I stood in front of the mirror, I heard my mother's voice in my mind. "Stand tall, even when you feel alone." I squared my shoulders, locked the door behind me, and drove toward the attorney's office, every mile a step further from the girl who had once let herself be pushed aside. The office itself was perched above a row of old shops, the kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and wood polish. Uncle Sam met me outside, offering a squeeze of my shoulder that felt like armor. "Whatever happens in there, you've got the truth on your side," he murmured. "That's more than most people ever have." I nodded, fighting to keep my nerves from showing. Inside, the waiting area was filled with familiar faces, all gathered under the polite pretense of mourning, though the tension. Then Linda glanced up, surprise flickering in her eyes before she masked it with a smile too tight to be real. "You're here," she said, her tone clipped but feigning civility. "I am," I answered, meeting her gaze with calm. I barely felt. Miss Grant cleared her throat and gestured for everyone to sit. "Let's begin. As you all know, we're here to read the last will and testament of Edward Brooks." She read the opening statements, her voice even, almost detached, as if this were just another contract to finalize. As she read, I studied the faces around the table: Linda's controlled confidence, Ava's barely restrained smirk, Max's obvious boredom. I recognized that look of triumph, the certainty that the world was already theirs. The reading started predictably. My father's personal belongings, his watches, cufflinks, and collection of rare books were divided among Ava, Max, and a few distant relatives. Linda received the family home, its contents, and a sizable investment account. When Miss Grant read my name, she did so without looking at me. "To my daughter Vanessa, I leave my love and my hope that she finds her own." A small, sharp pain twisted in my chest. Was that all? A wish for my happiness, nothing more? Linda shot me a sideways glance, the corners of her mouth turning up in satisfaction. Then the attorney paused, flipping to the next page. "As for Brooks' development, My controlling interest and the accompanying assets are to be administered as described in the attached documents. Ms. Grant hesitated, sifting through a stack of addenda. However, I must note a legal complication. Several months prior to his passing, Mr. Brooks transferred the deeds to all primary development property looked up, confused, into a private trust. These are not part of the probate estate. There was a stunned silence. Linda's face darkened, her fingers clenching on the armrest. Ava shifted in her seat, and Max finally looked up, his mask of indifference slipping. Linda broke the silence first. That can't be right. The company assets are the estate. The deeds should be part of this will. Who controls the trust? Her voice was steely, edged with panic. Miss Grant adjusted her glasses and turned to me. According to the filings, the sole beneficiary and trustee is Mrs. Vanessa Brooks. The words hung in the air, clear as crystal and just as cold. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Linda erupted, her voice rising. This is a mistake. Edward must have been coerced. I want to see those documents. Flinching, I reached into my bag and placed the folder of deeds, notarized statements, and video evidence on the table. Everything my father intended is right here, I said quietly. Sliding the files toward Miss Grant, he took every legal step to make sure these properties and my mother's legacy couldn't be touched. Miss Grant began examining the documents, her eyes widening as she recognized official signatures and dates. She quickly called in the firm's senior partner, Mr. Riley, who entered the room with a calm, grave expression. I was Edward's counsel for over 20 years, he announced. He made his wishes absolutely clear to me, and I personally oversaw the creation of this trust. Every transfer is legitimate. There's no ground for contest. Linda's anger burned hot. He was ill. He didn't know what he was doing. Ava and Max echoed her outrage, accusing me of manipulating Dad in his final days. But the room was turning. A few family friends, sensing the evidence, whispered among themselves. Uncle Sam leaned forward, voice steady and clear. Vanessa earned everything the hard way. Ed wanted her to have this. He made sure of it. Ms. Grant continued. Unless new evidence arises, this trust stands. Ms. Brooks is the rightful owner of all major properties, including the original land on which the company was founded, the downtown office, and the current development parcels. These are no longer part of the estate and cannot be challenged under this will. Linda rose abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You can't do this. I gave my life to this family. You're an outsider, Vanessa. You left. I stood, every muscle trembling but my voice steady. You forced me out, Linda. You tried to erase me, but Dad made sure you couldn't erase what mattered. I'm here because he wanted me here, and because this company, this legacy, was always more than just numbers on a page. Max's face twisted with anger. This isn't over. We'll fight you in court. Mr. Riley responded before I could. You're welcome to try, but you won't win. Edward left no loopholes. Ava's expression flickered, hurt, then regret. She glanced away, unable to meet my eyes. Around the table, the atmosphere shifted. For the first time, I felt the weight of history settling on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle I was meant to bear. Linda gathered her things, her movements sharp, clipped. You're making a mistake, Vanessa. You think a few old deeds make you family? You'll always be alone. Her voice shook as she swept from the room, Max trailing after, sullen and silent. Ava lingered a moment, searching my face, then followed. Stood there, surrounded by paperwork and the aftershock of confrontation, feeling the strange, dizzy relief of a fight survived. Uncle Sam hugged me tight, whispering, "Your mom and Dad would be proud." As the office emptied, I gathered my things, hands steady. The world outside felt changed. Familiar streets suddenly brighter, the sky somehow wider. For the first time since my mother died, I felt like I had finally come home, not just to the house or the business, but to myself. And I knew I would never let anyone rewrite my family's story again. After the confrontation at the attorney's office, I stepped outside into the waning sunlight, the world vibrating with a strange, new quiet. The air was fresher than I remembered, touched with the salt of the nearby ocean, and as I took it in, I realized how long I'd been holding my breath. Not just today, but for years. Uncle Sam walked beside me to the parking lot, his hand strong on my shoulder. "Was brave, kid," he said. "It's over now." I shook my head gently. "No, Sam, it's just beginning." Spent the following days in Encinitas, clearing the paperwork that came with becoming the new owner of my family's legacy. It was exhausting. There were meetings with lawyers, accountants, company managers who weren't sure whether to treat me as the boss or the enemy. Some staff were openly relieved, eager for stability after years of shifting priorities. Others, loyal to Linda, kept their distance, afraid or maybe ashamed. I chose not to judge them. Everyone had survived in their own way. The family home, legally Linda's now, was emptier each day. I stopped by once to pick up the last box of my childhood books. Linda was in the kitchen, sipping tea at the marble counter, the window open to let in the sea breeze. She didn't look up when I entered. I was ready for anger or bitterness, but there was only a tired sadness in her profile, a fragility that slipped through her fingers. I hesitated in the doorway. "Linda, I'm not here to fight. I just want my books, and to thank you for looking after Dad, even when things got hard." She gave a brittle laugh. "You think I did this just for money? For some title on a deed?" Her voice was raw now. "I was so scared after your mother died, so desperate to make this family work. But Ed?" She looked at me, her eyes glassy. "He always kept a part of himself for you, for her. I could never compete with that." I thought about what it meant to love someone who would always belong, in some secret way, to another life. Maybe Linda and I had both spent years fighting ghosts. Hers of my mother, mine of the family I'd lost. "He loved you, Linda," I said quietly. "In his way. But you can't force people to forget where they come from." She wiped her eyes and nodded, shoulders slumped. "You're not the villain, Vanessa. I'm tired of pretending either of us is." Ava and Max were less ready to talk, but over time, as I began repairing the company and shifting its focus, they reached out. Ava sent a short, honest email. "I'm sorry for everything. If there's a place for me in the company, I'd like to earn it this time." Max took longer. He called late one evening, voice tight. "I messed up. I know it. Dad wanted you to lead. If you need help on the construction side, I'm around." I agreed to give both of them a chance, but with new boundaries. Every hire earned, every role meaningful. For the first time, we would all have to prove ourselves. I threw myself into restoring the projects my parents had started. The original Bluff property became the centerpiece of my vision, a mix of affordable homes and green spaces, with community centers and small business grants built into the plan. At the ribbon cutting, I read a letter from my mother, written before her death. She wrote about dignity, hope, and building things that last beyond lifetimes. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd, and I felt her with me in that moment, steady, proud. As Solace Properties grew, I set up a scholarship fund in my mother's name for girls interested in architecture and urban planning. I gave talks at local schools, mentoring young women who saw in me a story of not giving up, even when those closest to you turned away. Uncle Sam became the unofficial historian of our family, collecting photos and stories, organizing reunions that started small and grew with each passing year. The more I invested in my community, the less my past hurt. Little by little, new roots grew over old scars. One spring, Linda decided to leave Encinitas. She moved north to be closer to her sister, sending me a single, handwritten note. "I hope you use what Ed left to build something beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't." There was no signature, but none was needed. I kept a framed copy of Dad's letter in my office, the one he left in the garden alongside my mother's old gardening gloves. When the company's board gathered for our first annual meeting under my leadership, I told them, "This isn't just a business, it's a promise. To my parents, to this community, and to myself. We're going to do things differently. We're going to do them right." Forgiveness didn't arrive in a single moment. It came quietly, over months, in the patient rebuilding of trust with Ava and Max, in the honest conversations I had with former employees and old friends. It came when I looked in the mirror and realized that the person I'd fought so hard to become wasn't the result of what my family took from me, but of what I chose to build for myself. Years later, standing on a newly finished balcony overlooking the Pacific, I understood what it meant to come full circle. Not every ending is a happy one, but some are peaceful. I'd found a way to let go of what I'd lost, and to keep what mattered most alive, for generations yet to come. If you've listened this far, maybe you know something about feeling left out, about being told by people you trusted that you don't belong. Maybe your family, like mine, wasn't always a safe harbor. Maybe you've stood at the edge of your own story, wondering if there's a way back, or if you should walk forward and build something new. For a long time, I believed that being cut out of my father's will, out of my family's story, meant I wasn't worthy, or that love was something to earn through sacrifice and silence. But the truth is, your worth is never defined by the spaces other people refuse to make for you. It's built every day in the choices you make, in the boundaries you set, in the kindness and courage you offer the world when no one else is watching. What my father left me wasn't just deeds or land. It was the freedom to choose who I wanted to be, even when the people around me tried to write a different ending. I hope, wherever you are, that you remember this. No one can erase your story. Not with a will, not with silence, not with time. If you've ever felt alone, or if you're still searching for a place to belong, know that you are not invisible. You are not erased. Share your story below if you feel ready, and let's remind each other that what we build for ourselves can outlast anything we're denied.